The UN Global Compact is the world's largest responsible business initiative. Members commit to the 10 universal principles which are derived from UN treaties in the areas of human rights, labour standards, environment, and good governance. You can find out more about what it means to become a member at the links being posted in the chat. Our role at the UN Global Compact Network UK is to help participants in the initiative fulfil their commitments to these principles and contribute to sustainable and responsible business practice in the UK. We believe that the SDGs are a crucial part of our work, and we drive progress on this agenda. We believe it's crucial that businesses recognise this agenda and take action for progress too. So today's webinar relates mainly to goals 8, 16 and 17, although reporting definitely cuts across all 17 of the goals. If you are interested in ways that your business can contribute to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, we have many resources, tools, and opportunities for engagement on our website. And I also encourage you to have a look at the resources being posted in the chat right now. Just a note on the conflicts in Gaza and in many other regions around the world right now, as these continue to pose threats to human rights. We're urging companies to take steps to ensure they're not complicit in human rights abuses through their direct operations or supply chains. I would also encourage anyone who's able to consider donating to the UN agencies bringing relief to people suffering as a result of these conflicts that are being posted in the chat right now. So I'm now going to hand over to our moderator, Caroline from Ricardo. This is just a bit about the series so far. This is the final session in the series, so thanks to everyone who's attended any of the sessions so far.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this morning's session, and welcome to everyone from wherever you may be dialing in from. Just a brief introduction to myself. I'm head of sustainability and ESG for the group. My main focus is around all the elements of ESG, working with all of the rating agencies and across all of the frameworks and standards and how that fits into our strategic framework for us as a, as a business. So, as we all know, sustainability reporting is becoming an increasingly vital aspect of a company's sustainability approach, particularly as jurisdictions across the world usher in new reporting standards. Many companies are tasked with reporting on vast and often unfamiliar data points, and as a result, it's easy for companies to get lost in compliance aspects of reporting and lose sight of the purpose to underpin and drive progress. So in this webinar today, we'll hear from our expert panel on sustainable finance and reporting to learn how companies and investors are using ESG data and how reporting can be a useful tool to drive strategic actions and be responsive to increasing stakeholder demands for companies to demonstrate transparency and tangible sustainable efforts. I'd like to introduce you to our speakers. We'll be hearing from Rawson. Simon is Director of Corporate Engagement and Deputy CEO of ShareAction. Simon leads their work to build ambitious collaborative investor engagement initiatives to drive responsible business practices across issues including climate change, biodiversity, population health, and decent work. After Simon, David Harris will join us, Head of Sustainable Finance, Strategic Initiatives and Partnerships at the London Stock Exchange, also known as LSEG. David has worked in sustainable investment for over 20 years, and in his role, he's responsible for driving strategic sustainable initiatives and partnerships across all of LSEG Group divisions, having previously led sustainable investment for FTSE Russell and sustainable finance strategy for LSEG's Data and Analytics division. And then our third speaker is Lucy Bond. Lucy has over 20 years of experience working in regulation and compliance. As Global Head of Sustainability at Man Group, Lucy is responsible for the firm's corporate social responsibility strategy and leads the global DE&I efforts, working closely with the regional teams to deliver report on progress. So I'm sure you'll agree, we have a great combination of speakers today. So it's my pleasure to introduce Simon Rawson. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Caroline. Thanks, Billy, and thanks to the UN Global Compact Network for having me today. I understand that we're being joined by members of the Turkish network, so I should say Herkese merhabalar, futbolda tebrikler. It's very good to be with you as well today. My name is Simon Rawson. As Caroline said, I'm the Deputy Chief Executive at ShareAction. Just before I tell you a little bit about how we work with investors to engage with companies on issues relating to sustainability, maybe worth just giving 30 seconds of personal background. I started out life in government, working in diplomacy and international development, and so worked to support the Sustainable Development Goals there for the British government. I then moved into the private sector and worked for a large corporate and management consultancy, leading sustainability in-house for that firm for 7 years. And latterly, for the last 5 years, I've been here at ShareAction, which is a non-profit. If you are able to flip to the next slide, Billy, you'll see that our focus really is on the financial system and defining the highest standards of responsible investment. But the way we do that, one of the ways we do that, is by building collaborative initiatives of investors to engage with companies like yours in the real economy. Could you move on to the next slide, please, Billy? Caroline, you mentioned these themes, but I want to just give you a little bit of a flavor of what this looks like. So we build groups of investors, asset owners and asset managers, sometimes a small group of maybe half a dozen, sometimes large groups of up to 50 investors who want to engage with companies on these issues, from climate change through to decent work. And I think the first point I'd really like to make, Billy, on the next slide, please, is that the reasons that investors do this are varied. And one of the critical things you'll be thinking about in your approach to sustainability reporting is, of course, the question of materiality. And the key point I have is that investor views on materiality are not homogeneous. They are varied. They are not the same. Perhaps here on the left-hand side, you have the classic or traditional view of financial materiality. How does an issue impact the enterprise value? How does it impact financial risk and return at the company level? But honestly, while that might be a traditional view, I'd say that that's just one part of the many reasons that the investors that we work with, which include some of the world's largest pension schemes and largest asset managers, and they have many other reasons that they care about the environmental and social risks and impacts at companies. Portfolio value, as I've called it here, or system level risk, is this idea that diversified investors cannot externalize costs. So why at a company level, it's very possible to say that the cost of carbon can simply be externalized. The cost of low pay can be externalized to society. That just doesn't work for a diversified investor that holds a broad set of companies across the economy. Any cost to society is a cost to the portfolio, and most value is derived from beta, from portfolio value, rather than from alpha, economic outperformance at the company level. So portfolio value and system stewardship is incredibly important to a broad set of our investors. Another lens that they take is what we call beneficiary best interest. So if you are a fiduciary investor, for example, if you are a trustee for a pension scheme, you care about the best interest of your beneficiary. That's your fiduciary duty. And guess what? pension savers care about a lot more than just cash. They care about the quality of the world that they live in. They care about the quality of work that the companies they invest in provide. And when we survey pension savers, a large majority want their schemes to be thinking about these issues. And then only last but least do you have the traditional view of impact, so double materiality, people, investors, beneficiaries who care just about impacts on people and planet. So it's fallacious to think that the investor view of materiality is purely about enterprise value. It's absolutely not. And I'd really encourage you, when you think about your investors' interests, when you're thinking about your materiality assessment, I'd encourage you to really interrogate what might be the varying different views of materiality that they all have. Can we flip to the next slide, Billy? Thank you. These are just some examples of some of the issues on which we've engaged with companies. And just to give you a sense that they span all types of topics, it's not purely climate change and carbon reporting. It covers social issues. It covers environmental issues. And I'd like to tell you just one little story about how I think companies could better engage with investors on their sustainability reporting. So feel free to flip on to the next slide, Billy. Over the past few years, we've been engaging with food companies with a large group of 45 investors. Again, a mix of asset owners and asset managers of all sorts of sizes and shapes from all across the world, on the health impacts, the population health impacts of the food system. And I won't go too deep, except to say that it's expected that the cost to the global economy of obesity by 2035 is going to be about 4% of GDP because of the diet-related ill health that the food system currently drives. And this group of investors has been engaging with food retailers and manufacturers for 5 years. They have been asking a very simple ask, which is to report the health impacts of the food sales that they have, using established metrics for healthiness of portfolios. This group of investors got excellent engagement from UK food retailers and worked collaboratively over 2 years to agree with many of them that they are now reporting publicly, transparently, the proportion of the food that they sell that is healthier. Whereas when engaging with global manufacturers and some large global food and drink manufacturers in Europe in particular, the response and the willingness to engage from those companies was far less forthcoming. And it led in the most recent AGM season to the investor group filing a shareholder proposal at the world's largest food and drink manufacturer. The first shareholder resolution they've ever faced. And I'm pretty sure that it was a pretty unwelcome experience for that company. I'm sure it was time-consuming, costly, distracting from the mission that they say they have, which is to help people live healthier lives. And had that company really listened and engaged with those investors at an earlier stage, it's my belief that they would have met the reporting expectations that the investors had set out, and that they would have avoided that cost to the company. So on the next slide, Billy, just some thoughts on the approach to engaging with investors. Do it early, do it often. Don't just think about the big names. I've already talked about the different materiality lenses which different investors bring. And I'd encourage you not to let investor engagement be gatekept by your investor relations team. In closing, I thought it might be helpful to point to some interesting resources, and we'll send the links round afterwards, or UNGC will send the links round. So on the next slide, Billy, whenever I attend conferences with companies on sustainability reporting, it's very clear to me, I hear how overwhelmed companies are by the multiple different layers of sustainability reporting. But I've been really impressed with the way that reporting frameworks are building resources for companies right now to help them through. And these are just three that I think are particularly good, and we'll share the links round. And I was asked to give a thought a little bit to UK companies and the UK sustainability disclosure standards that are somewhat delayed but still on their way. And so on the next slide, again, we'll share the links. I've added some thoughts as to the things that UK companies thinking about UK SRS can do already. Perhaps I'll call out two here. I think that the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, TNFD, has done a phenomenal job of providing exceptional guidance to companies on how to adopt it. And in the UK, I think we can be extremely proud of the work of the Transition Plans Task Force, which their disclosure framework is already being adopted around the world, including by the ISSB. And so very last slide and very last thought from me, which is that I mentioned that whenever I end up in a conference room or a meeting or on a webinar, the number one topic is the overwhelm of reporting, the overwhelm of data points in ESRS, the multiple overlapping frameworks, where to start, how to navigate this within a company. And I suppose I just wanted to leave you with some of the reasons why I think this is important. Sustainability reporting is there to help us tackle some of the most pressing challenges that we have in our societies today. And whether that be through the water pollution we're seeing in the UK, whether it be through the 40-year high social inequality in this country, or just this morning waking up to the devastating effects of yet another extreme weather event in Hurricane Beryl in the Caribbean. These are the reasons why I care about sustainability reporting, because I think it helps us get into a better place to tackle these. Thanks, Caroline. Back to you.
Caroline, you've just gone mute, I think, instead of unmuting.
Sorry about that. Great presentation. Thank you, Simon. It was really good to hear a perspective from the other side, away from the corporate side. And I think your final words, it is a reminder of why we are all here and why we do what we do. So I would now like to hand you over to David Harris from the London Stock Exchange. Thank you, David. Thanks, Simon.
Hi. Thanks, Caroline, and thanks, Billy, and thanks to the UN Global Compact for the invitation to join you today. What I was going to do is maybe I'll give you a little bit more kind of context on us. So we're actually much wider than London Stock Exchange, and I'll explain a bit about the group in a minute, and I guess our role within some of this. Then I'll talk a little bit about the opportunity side and exactly how this kind of information gets used by the investment and finance community, which I think should hopefully build quite well off some of Simon's points. Talk a bit about what does this really mean for kind of corporate reporters. I can also pick up and touch on a few things like materiality, transition plans, XBRL as well, and then I'll give you kind of a few takeaways as well. So firstly, just as by way of context on LSEG. So we are a very diversified financial services provider with market infrastructure as well as data and analytics. We came together with Refinitiv, which was the Thomson Reuters data business a few years ago. With 25,000 people, we operate in 60 countries. Majority of revenues is from the US. Majority of staff are in Asia. We're one of the largest data analytics providers. We also are an index provider, and I've spent a big chunk of my career in the FTSE Russell business, but also post trade, all the kind of the trading and settlement after securities are bought or sold. So, and we have a risk intelligence business as well, which is all the kind of due diligence type work when you kind of money laundering, green crime. This is kind of things like World Check and enhanced due diligence. But so we are experiencing a huge set of demand from the financial sector for a lot of this information. So we are a huge consumer of it. We have hundreds and hundreds of analysts scouring through everybody's sustainability reports, a fair amount of use of tech as well in trying to kind of clean and process that information, building it into a range of analytics, building it into indexes. We also obviously, as with the exchange part of the business, we're also helping and trying to support companies on these issues too, providing guidance, providing training. So we just provided ISSB training for issuers just last week. Again, if people are interested in that, we can also organise more of that kind of thing too. But also we're a reporter ourselves, so we are facing the same issues that everybody else is facing because we're having to do this too. So it's very real for us, and I think we have probably quite a balanced view about, on one hand, the real need for this kind of information, and on the other hand, what the challenge is with reporting it. So I think maybe it's just worth looking at just the sheer size of the kind of wall of capital. I mean, this is massive. The whole of the kind of financial industry is now trying to consume and use this information. So you may have come across initiatives like GFANZ. This is the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. It came out of COP26, which was hosted in the UK up in Glasgow. And this was interesting because it wasn't just the investor community, it's also the banks, the insurers, the financial service providers, all kind of coming together. I mean, nearly 700 different financial institutions, all to commit to how to kind of provide them, build this deeply into what we're doing so that we're helping achieve net zero. What does that mean for the financial sector? Well, that means actually understanding everyone else's climate performance, what their targets are, what their transition plans are, and kind of building that into their own financing and investments. So that has a big impact on capital flows. It's also worth being clear, I think, that much of this has been driven ultimately by the pension funds, by the asset owners, and Simon touched on some of this, but that they have been moving hugely. When I joined FTSE over 20 years ago, when I was leading system investment there, we've been calculating these indexes, FTSE for good, for a very long time. Back then, pension funds wouldn't take meetings on this kind of stuff. That's completely changed today. We do a survey of asset owners globally each year, looking at these issues and what are their different priorities. About 5 years ago, we passed a critical threshold, which was over half of asset owners globally were looking at how to integrate ESG across their portfolios. That now today stands at 80%. So this isn't like a little bit of the market. This is the market. And so it's really important that corporate reporters understand that. So coming on to that, so what does this really mean for reporting? There is obviously a massive shift going on. We are shifting from, I'm not sharing a presentation. I think there was a question on that I'm just speaking for this one. There's obviously a huge shift going on from voluntary reporting to mandatory reporting. And so that means a lot of kind of reassessment, I think, for a lot of companies. Do they still need to keep filling in all these different surveys that are coming at them? Really, we need to get to as a point of reporting once really well and very comprehensively, and getting everybody to use that information. I think it's fine if organisations are getting in touch with you to check the information you've reported, but increasingly, hopefully, we can start moving away from a lot of the private surveys. We, and I'm sure many others, are looking at how they start to get ready for CSRD reporting. It's for many organisations, that's bringing it under, getting their finance teams much more involved and engaged and hands-on on this. Many companies are actually putting some of their sustainability reporting teams under their financial reporting teams. But however, if you're affected by it and are looking to report, then I think it's very welcome to get the finance teams engaged here. We need a lot of their professionalism, really, and their approach, to start building that across the way we're doing sustainability reporting. I think that helps everybody. It's painful, and I know everyone's having to kind of build up teams to be able to handle that. But I think it does. It's a learning process, and it is going to help. We've also obviously got, as Simon touched on, ISSB coming. We had an event during London Climate Week, which was kind of the 1 year on since the ISSB launch, which we did jointly with IFRS and ISSB. There are 20 different countries which have already announced that they're going to implement ISSB. It's there's another 30 or so which are saying that they're planning on implementing it too. So and I should say we have been a big supporters of ISSB. We're very worried about global fragmentation and just all of these different reporting standards. And that's got to stop. We need to have as close to possible. I mean, a lot of discussion of interoperability, which is great, but really we want to have single reporting standards. I think that helps both companies, that helps investors. We did a call to action actually just a few months ago where we had over 120 organizations calling on governments to get implementing ISSB by 2025. And the reason why we're very keen to that is to make sure that we're getting consistent information when we're providing a lot of the data and the analytics to the investment and the finance community. It's really hard putting it together when you've got different information coming from different markets. And obviously companies face that challenge too. So the good news, so S1 is like the general reporting principles, and which is very much links it to financial reporting actually, so you're applying the same kinds of disciplines. S2 is all about climate, and the good news is that S2 at a kind of a technical level is completely aligned with ESRS, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards that underpin the CSRD. So that's positive, and really, I think it's really just to get going on that now rather than waiting. Obviously, UK is getting going, is looking at how to implement it. I'm a member of the TAC, which is the Technical Advisory Committee, which is a group of us that's a meeting monthly and looking at all the issues about how to bring it into UK legislation, and we'll give recommendations to whatever government is in place after the UK elections. In kind of towards the end of the year, there'll be some further consultation, and then that will kind of come out next year. But the UK's been very clear, and that's kind of cross political parties as well, that there is a support for ISSB implementation. It is worth understanding that different investors and finance providers use information in different ways. So many investors who kind of scale, very diversified investors, many of the big ones around the world, are not actually going through your reports. They are collecting, they are using data vendors, ourselves and our peers, who are processing your information. There'll be a more kind of active managers who may be then looking much more detailed at your, particularly if they're running smaller portfolios. But there's different kinds of investors who will be using your information in different ways. So I think it's important to understand, and that you're not just doing it on a compliance basis, but you're thinking about that usability for the investor community. I do think there's too much debating about materiality, and that's obviously one of the big differences between CSRD and ISSB, that you've got the double versus the single. My view, a lot of this is really kind of dancing on the end of a pin. For a lot of, we published a research paper looking at different investor methodologies and approaches on whether they were double or single, and there was no statistical significant difference between how they assessed different sectors and whether they were stated one or the other. Really, it's a continuum, and different investors have got different views on what they regard as material, as do companies. So I think that's, it's a lot of over complexity, a lot of too much debate about materiality. I think we need to get over that and get on with reporting on these issues. XBRL, hopefully really helpful. Do look into this. It's about digital tagging. It makes it much easier for users of data to select it all and to use it, and to better pull out your data from your reporting. Transition plans, maybe we can get on to a bit more into Q&A. I was been on the delivery group for the transition plan task force. I do think it's really helpful. It's not about necessarily annual reporting. This is something which sits separately to your reporting typically. I think the expectation is that it's kind of every 2 or 3 years that you do your transition plan. There's more of it sets the kind of the targets and long-term goals, and then you're reporting against it and then updating it if there are significant changes to your business. So really just takeaways. I think, firstly, get reporting, get disclosing, don't wait, get it. This is a learning process. And I think the investor community and the finance community also understand that too. So, but just get going, get learning, learn through doing. Secondly, be ambitious. So go for those kind of ambitious goals. You won't be punished if you don't necessarily hit them. So do be ambitious, but also keep it real, and really explain what you can do and what you can't do. And I think that also links into a kind of a third point, which is engage others. So I think be clear about what's with it, what can you achieve and what can't you achieve, and what policy changes do you need, what regulatory changes do you need to be able to achieve some of your targets. Also engage investors, as Simon mentions, but also obviously your suppliers and your peers too. So let me pass back to you, Caroline.
Thank you very much, David. And again, another really interesting insight, I'm sure you'll agree, from the other side of from the corporate world we don't often get to be involved in. And I think the whole point of we're all in this together, it's incredibly complex. Everyone's looking for which way they should turn and what's right for their business. Ultimately, everyone's on a journey, and transparency is absolutely key from my personal view there. So thank you again, David. And I shall now hand it over to Lucy. Thank you very much, Lucy.
Thank you, Caroline. And I'm very pleased to be here from Man Group. For those of you who don't know Man Group, we were founded by James Mann back in 1783, and we're an active investment manager listed on the FTSE 250. We've got 15 offices around the world, and we're headquartered in London. So we've got a broad range of regulations affecting us, as well as voluntary initiatives that we can align with. I cover sustainability for the group side of Man Group. I'm going to talk about some of our sustainability reporting relating to our non-financial KPIs, specifically carbon emissions, diversity and equity, diversity and inclusion metrics, and then talk to scoring and how that works for us. So Billy, next slide, please. And then the next one again. Thank you. So carbon emissions of companies are a good example of a voluntary disclosure that's now becoming underpinned by regulation and standards. So capturing and reviewing this data is crucial for informing strategy and investment to see where we can improve and how we'll fund that. A few years ago, we set out our pathway to net zero, and that commitment to achieve net zero carbon emissions across our operations by 2030 is something that's endorsed by our board and senior management. As Simon and David both mentioned, the transition planning guidance has now been issued, and that's got specific guidance for sectors, which includes asset management, with provisions on how firms will meet climate targets, will manage climate-related risks, and contribute to achieving net zero. So we're busy reconciling our pathway that we have in place with the sectoral specific guidance that's been issued. Those plans do need to have board level oversight and have set deadlines for completion, and they need to be reported against annually and included in financial reporting as well. So our pathway to net zero breaks out our actions for scopes 1, scope 2 and scope 3, and we focus on ensuring our reporting and the action we have decided to take is clear and transparent. We look in depth at our data to enable this. So for example, looking at scope 1 emissions for us means we've committed to reducing our emissions for natural gas and fuel by 30% by the end of this year. For scope 2, one example is our focus on reducing energy usage by installing and upgrading equipment to ensure efficiency and to reduce wastage. Scope 2 emissions, we're also working to deep dive more of the scope 3 categories, which is upstream leased assets and business travel. So we're working towards increasing our use of renewable energy and looking at each of our offices in turn to ensure that when we, for example, move offices, we prioritise our carbon net zero strategies. We communicate through to all of our stakeholders, so to our clients, our investors through our annual report, through our corporate sustainability brochure, through our investor days and our website. And of course, we communicate to our employees as well. And we run campaigns in the workplace on how we can all be more energy efficient. And we find actually our employees are hugely engaged in that work. So responsibility is one of our 6 business principles. And this is a good example of that in action. Lastly, on this page, accreditation absolutely helps. So with communicating the standards we hold ourselves to, but also with planning and action. So we look at the status of our buildings. We assure whenever we can that they comply with BREEAM or LEED or neighbours. For example, our building in London is certified by LEED and BREEAM, and we're working towards a neighbours certification at the moment. We're also working towards ISO 14001 for our London office, and we work with an advisor to obtain limited assurance over our GHG reporting. Next slide, please. So we move on to diversity and inclusion. And these are both good examples of how voluntary reporting is now becoming mandatory in certain circumstances. So we signed the Women in Finance Charter run by the UK HMT in 2018, pledging to promote gender diversity, set targets and report publicly on our progress. This is championed by senior management, and indeed our CEO is the accountable executive to HMT for this. And our Man Group board champions this as well, and that board has had at least 50% of women as non-executive directors since 2020. Since then, we've seen a positive trajectory in the proportion of women in senior management roles, which we define as the executive committee members and their direct reports. We continue to set our targets and challenge ourselves to be better, and we continue to assess our data. We might look at who is leaving us, look at the markers that we can, which include gender, age, tenure, to spot patterns. That will help us inform the benefits and support that we provide to our people and tweak these for different groups. So, for example, that data has led us to introduce maternity coaching, fertility support, and menopause support in the workplace. A few years ago, we also signed the Race at Work Charter. That has 7 key actions. Now, initially, we couldn't set a target for representation of ethnicity in senior management because we didn't have the level of completed data that would inform that target. Having communicated to our people why we wanted them to complete their data meant that when the Parker Review came in last year, which requires UK-listed firms to set a target for representation of ethnic minority in senior management, we were able to do that. So we've set our target for 2027 and we'll report on that annually. To Simon's point on social inequality, we also look at metrics for socioeconomic data in the UK. We're founding partner of Progress Together and have signed the Social Mobility Pledge and are members of the 93% Club. I should emphasise that we can't collect data on all of our people in all of our locations. So everyone has the right to select, prefer not to say, and in some countries we can't ask those questions. But in the UK, we can collect data, and having that data and the representation of our people means we can benchmark ourselves to the general population and see where we need to deep dive, seek feedback and develop our strategies. We're now, on my final point here, turning our attention to metrics, allowing us to measure culture and inclusion. So we have an annual engagement survey already, but led by our board and senior management, we're moving towards pushing ourselves further towards different sources of data for that. Next slide, please. So moving on to ESG scoring. I think about this as having 4 different pillars. So 1 is action, what are you doing? 2 is promotion, how are you telling your stakeholders about what you're doing? Number 3 is endorsement, so who's sponsoring your activity? And then number 4 is influence, so how can you achieve further impact? We look at who we're rated by. For us, that might be ISS, MSCI, Sustainalytics. They all have annual reports on Man Group. They all have questionnaires that we can go into, have a look at the questions, contribute data, contribute information, and improve how we're scored. That comes together with frameworks that we complete, which I'll come on to in a minute. And all of that can come together to inform your future actions. So this is an iterative process where you're looking at how you influence, and then you're feeding that back into your action to ensure that continuous improvement. Next slide, please. So finally, some information or ideas for promotion. So if I hold these pillars in the middle still in my mind, some ideas for promotion include our annual report, our diversity, equity and inclusion report, our corporate sustainability brochure, our website and our supplier code of conduct. They all define our standards and give people information on what we're doing here at Man Group. And then the frameworks on the right-hand side will help us be better. So for example, when you go into the carbon disclosure plan and you complete that data, it will ask you, are you doing this now? Or are you planning to do this in the next 2 years? If you select, are you going to do this in the next 2 years? You can feed that back into your action plan and develop a strategy on how to get there. We also complete, for example, the social mobility index. The same point there, feeding back into action, the Women in Finance Charter, the gender pay gap, the Parker Review target, and our modern slavery statement. So hopefully I've given you some examples of how sustainable reporting can help to inform your future strategy and build value for a company. Thank you. And back to Caroline.
Thank you very much, Lucy. That was really, really good. And again, thought-provoking, lots to think about. Okay, we're going to go into Q&A now, so I invite the panelists to unmute and let's see what questions we have. And for all of those who on the call, please do feel free to ask any questions, put them in the Q&A. It's all up for debate. We're all in, you know, the way I look at this is everyone's in this together. There is no one quick and easy answer. It varies dramatically between institutions, organizations, corporates, and being on the corporate side, you know, we have our challenges, and the demands on reporting and disclosure are great. But let's have a look at some of the questions. So, okay, there's quite a few people asking, please could you explain a bit more what you mean by diversified investors cannot externalize carbon costs? I think maybe I will direct that to Simon.
I can take a first shot at that. I think it means I did a very bad job of explaining it. So it's not super complicated. If you want to read more, I mean, it's called universal ownership theory, and this is the idea that over decades, diversification in investing has been a phenomenal success in managing risk, in building portfolios which build stable returns for beneficiaries. So diversification, picking stocks and asset classes across a broad range in order to ensure that depending on market conditions, you always have or you maximize your chances of having good returns. So portfolios are highly diversified for lots of asset owners. Not all, clearly, but lots of asset owners have highly diversified portfolios. And their returns depend, according to some studies, over 90% of their returns depend not on the performance of an individual company, but on the health of the market, on the health of the economy. So you might well have a company in your portfolio that is, I don't know, call it an oil and gas company, call it a manufacturing company, whatever you want to pick, that is outperforming because it is externalizing its costs of carbon. It's not covered by a carbon tax or a border mechanism in the EU. It's sitting there pumping out greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. But what happens as a result of that is that creates a cost to the economy. That's why we call them externalities, right? So these are costs to the whole economy. And that means that the whole market's returns are reduced. And if 90% of your returns depend on the health of the market, not the health of an individual company, then it's in your interest as a highly diversified investor that company does not act in that way, does not externalize the cost. In essence, if you're a universal owner and you own the market, you can't externalize costs from an individual company. They ultimately affect the market. And yet again, I feel like I've probably done a very bad job of
maybe Caroline, time I could come in and just maybe provide a bit of a kind of practical example on that. So one of the biggest pension fund or asset owner in the world is GPIF, the government pension fund of Japan. And their CIO very eloquent on this, and was saying how that they were. He said, I try and explain to people that we're a long-term investor. They don't really get it. They think I maybe mean like 3 years, 5 years. And I say, no, we're really, really long. And they can't really, maybe they think maybe not 7 years. And so in the end, he's using the term kind of intragenerational. They're interested in intragenerational returns, and they're so big as effectively invested across the whole economy. So they're less interested about whether portfolio A outperforms portfolio B or company A outperforms company B. And so that it also links into like their index investing. So they are a massive user of sustainability indexes, and they're using it as a way to engage companies at scale. So they want to see companies improve their sustainability standards, because their investment belief is that with higher sustainability standards, the overall markets will perform in a more stable and higher growth way for all of those reasons. So, but yeah, so it is these pension funds which have been driving so much of the growth of this, pushing pressure on their asset managers, on their service providers.
Great, thank you, David. We have another question, which looks like it's a popular question. So, how would you recommend to start mapping out the value chain in preparation for the double materiality assessment and reporting in compliance with CSRD, especially in regards to how detailed you should be and how far out your responsibility goes? So I could probably pass that to Lucy to start with, if that's all right with you, Lucy.
You can. And I watched a TNFD webinar yesterday, and the best advice is just start. Just start now, just read. Yeah. And start. And I think everybody has said that, me less so perhaps today, but it is just about reconciling all the data, all of the different standards, and then just digging into it, gathering people together. Who do you need to help you internally? Do you need external help as well? I'm sure Simon and David will have something to add.
Thank you, Lucy. David, Simon, would you like to interject rather?
Yeah, I mean, it's supply chain visibility is a problem I've experienced when in-house, and I hear all the time from companies in conferences on sustainability reporting, and as well as CSRD with the CSDDD, the due diligence directive coming in. I mean, that's going to be even more important. You're responsible throughout your supply chain. But I guess, and it's perhaps not very huge wisdom to say that don't let the complexity of it stop action. You can also take a proportional approach, and it is about looking at where your risks lie from a human rights perspective, and where the greatest impacts lie from an environmental perspective. So I think if I'm not mistaken, investors and businesses have been doing this forever, is looking at where the greatest risks lie, looking at where the greatest impacts are, who are your biggest suppliers. But simply saying, we just do tier one, it no longer washes anymore, or won't, and there will be need to go further. But that can be addressed by building partnerships with your suppliers and working through that. So the only or the best advice perhaps I can give is ultimately, of course, it's going to be a proportional approach, but inaction is just not going to wash, and that CSDDD is the one that you really need to watch out for.
Thank you, Simon. I'll actually add to that. My career a long time ago started out in the FMCG sector. So I've been in global supply chain for a long time, and at Ricardo we have as a global consultancy, but with 2 pockets of manufacturing, we have our own challenges within that. So example, German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, well, that doesn't actually impact us, but actually it does, because of some of the German clients that we have. So we have started looking at how we implement that across our value chain. And I think one of the key things is you can't do it all at once. You need to have your board, your senior management supporting you, their understanding of what it is, the potential implications of how it may impact a business, by reputation, by damage with suppliers, whichever way you look at it. And how you start the process. As I say, you can't do it all at once. So look at your supply chain, look at your priorities, look at where the high risk areas are, particularly with around forms of modern slavery, and understand that they are in every single country. It's not just in far-flung countries from the UK that people think it is here on our doorstep. So there is a huge challenge, but it is about piece-sized chunks with a pragmatic, considered approach. And if you can report that and say, this is what we're aiming to do for this year, then report, this is what we did during this year, this is for next year. As long as there's transparency and you're showing that you are aware of the standards, the frameworks, and working towards it and developing and making improvements, then that is a better position to be in than doing nothing or worst case greenwashing, reporting something that you then can't substantiate. So on to another question. Let me see. Yeah, so
Karen, part of the question
sure.
there was also kind of linked, was on kind of like, again, about the kind of, the double versus single materiality as well. And that kind of sort of comes up in a few questions. Maybe I could kind of, I touched on it before, maybe I could kind of double down on that just a little bit more.
Absolutely.
So and clearly there are certain processes under CSRD that we have to comply with if you're reporting on it. And so you have to kind of go through that process. I think on the other hand, I think it is really possible on really bringing together that approach with the so-called kind of single materiality. It's just about thinking long term, which I think is, was part of that kind of question too. And if you're thinking about, a lot of sustainability issues, a lot of ethical issues can over time become financial risks for the business, or opportunities indeed for the business too. So I think if you're thinking over longer time scales, I think it's that then you're able to kind of bring the two together. I mean, with particular examples, if you've got kind of suppliers that are very high kind of carbon intense, with higher costs of carbon in the future, that's higher costs for your business. It's not just it's not just a climate issue; it's potentially a relevant business issue. If it's to your point earlier, Caroline, when you've got a classic example, sometimes used on double materiality as well. If you've got a company with a big brand, maybe then it matters more if you've got dodgy things going on somewhere in your supply chain. Well, even if you haven't got a big brand, you will be selling into bigger brand organizations potentially. You're not going to escape it. It's just you might have got a little bit more time before it comes out.
Yeah.
So I don't think really. I think most things when you look at it do come together. If it's a significant impact on society and the planet, there is clearly going to be some risk back to the business.
Thank you, David.
It's really good, great to hear you say that, David, and I completely agree. And it sounds from the research that you mentioned that you've got some, evidence behind that too. That was certainly the point I was trying to make, that the investors that we work with certainly don't have a sort of binary view of single versus double materiality. It's on a spectrum, as I tried to illustrate. And if you look back to the ISSB language, actually, its materiality is about information that is useful to the primary users of the reporting. And, I think that we both described the fact that in general, it's false to suggest that investors only look at information relevant to enterprise value.
Thank you. Talking of information gathering, so another question came, given that large investors are using data from third parties, so that would be the likes of MSCI, ISS, S&P Global, Sustainalytics, etc. The question is, are there obvious ways? Sorry?
And us as well.
And of course, LSEG, yes. Well, FTSE Russell, yes. FTSE for good, absolutely.
And Refinitiv too.
Yeah, and the question really is about all the data being gathered and used, which is generally extracted from what your business puts in the public domain. People are curious as to what is the best way of accessing that data. How can they bring it together? Are there other, what methods are the best ways you could recommend other than Excel downloads? Any thoughts and ideas on that? Advice, I guess.
Happy to give some thoughts. Yes, I mean, so obviously there is increasing amount of automation. So I think the question references a bit, the XBRL tagging will certainly be really helpful. I think the main thing is actually about it's not about where you report it. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend Excel, but it's more about showing your workings, show your assumptions. If you restate, that's okay. You can restate, particularly people around scope 3, you're going to probably need to at some points, but just explain that, and then when you are restating, provide the old and the new together. I mean, it was a transparency point you made earlier on, Caroline, but it's really important that investors get the breakdowns as well. So don't just bring all of your data together and put some kind of single overall aggregates. Provide the breakdowns to as detailed a level as you can, if possible, and the assumptions you've used and the estimates where you've done it and how you did those estimates. Show all of your workings, I think is the main point.
Thank you. Another question linked to that: how do you manage data for reporting across 16 locations, and are there systems that become more sophisticated throughout the reporting journey, which helps manage with different data streams and how you keep up with the momentum across different areas of the business? Lucy, would you like to respond to that one?
Yeah, thank you. So if I think about some tangible examples here, the managing data for reporting across the 16 locations. So if I think about our offices in the EU, these directives that are coming in are yet to be, most of them, transponded into national law. So we might have some differences there, but you have a harmonised standard at the top. When that comes down by country, that then obviously will differ. If I think about the gender pay gap, for example, that applies to us in the UK because we've got more than 250 staff, but it doesn't apply to us in Ireland, for example, or in any of our European offices. And we would still look at that data. We still cut that data globally to help ourselves be better, but we're not mandated to report. So there are different reporting standards coming in by size, and in the UK we are by far bigger than any of our other presences. Systems definitely are becoming more sophisticated, so we have moved to using a system to capture our scope 1 and scope 2 emissions from various offices, and that's helped us become better. So for example, in some offices where you rent, you will receive one bill at the end of the year, which isn't tremendously helpful when you want to quantify all of your energy usage. You just have to work with that office and the supplier. You'll be able to then alter the data that comes in and catalogue it differently. And then you'll be able to look at whether you can affect the stream of energy coming in. Can you change to renewable? And then as you move offices, you might make that a criteria of moving, like we must have influence over the energy that powers the building. That will help us be better. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Lucy. David or Simon?
I think my knowledge on this is probably a bit out of date, honestly, because although what Lucy's saying brings flashbacks from when I was trying to collect electricity data from 80 odd offices around the world, but perhaps David has something to add.
I mean, there are a huge amount of tools out there. We have some, but others have them too. If you've already got firms you're working with who provide some of your financial reporting tools, talk to them about it. There's a lot of, there's loads of providers who will help you, who will be delighted to help you. So, but look at who you're already using potentially is one way forward.
I can add to that. Ricardo did a big due diligence piece just over a year ago, looking for how we can capture our carbon reporting for scopes 1, 2, 3. Very, very long story short, we now partner, and I can use their name publicly, it's not an issue. We were partnered with an organisation called FigBytes. At the time, I've probably met with over 20 organisations that can capture data, do the calculations, and do help with your reporting for you for streamlining across an organisation with multiple offices, sites and countries. However, a lot of them, that was all they did. The partner we're with, it's an overarching ESG platform. So not only will it do all the data input from all the different areas of the business, invoices, smart meter readings, etc., for the CO2 GHG piece, you can also do employee surveys as part of Scope 3, which we've done for business travel as well. You can have DEI targets put in there, wastewater, supply procurement. You can have access for suppliers to go in on that value chain aspect. So there's definitely organisations out there. And Vedantics, I don't know if any of you have heard of Vedantics. They're quite visible out there. They've been doing a lot of work around this, seeing who the organisations are that provide software. So there is definitely a lot out there to help. Okay, any other questions? Let me see. I think, Lucy, you touched on the question with regards waste data. Is, you know, we spoke about collecting data, and I would say waste data again. We're on that journey too. We've started that in the last 2 years. It's about setting your clear objectives of what it is you want to collect, what the waste is, what the type is, what the waste streams are, through to end use, be it recycling, reuse, use of hazardous waste. And again, it's about communication across the business and giving clear direction and getting those internal stakeholders nominated to work with you on it, so you can start to capture that data.
And I can see there's some questions on it, XBRL.
Yes, I was just about to come to that, David. Yeah, please do.
So to say what this is about. So you'll probably have people in your organisation already used to using XBRL for your financial reporting. It's actually relatively simple. It's actually just a little, effectively a code that goes across each data point, each reporting. And it's not just the quantitative data, but some of the description stuff as well. And it will link into different individual, both CSRD and ISSB data pointers. So it really just helps, does help with interoperability, which I think was one of the questions, because it does mean then that the same data points can be picked up under using the same tag. And so it is helpful to use that, but talk to the people who are already using it on the financial side.
Thank you. Hopefully that answers many people's questions. I think with the questions that have come through, we've pretty much covered a lot of them. There is a question here, which again, it's for you, David, talking about digital tagging. Can it help with interoperability at all, and how does it benefit companies from an investment perspective? Perhaps you could enlighten a little bit there.
Yeah, so it does. It might better help a bit with reporting burden, in that you can then you can use the tags to cross-link. Some of you say, we already covered these elsewhere, so that's one piece. But it also means that it's easier for the investor community to get hold of your information, because it allows us to be able to suck out the information using more kind of technology rather than analysts scouring through the report to try to find stuff.
Sure. Simon, would you like to add anything to that?
Not really, only to say, it came up earlier talking about, ESG ratings and how all of that data is typically scraped or taken from published reports. I mean, apart from a certain type of investor that is using ratings in a very simplistic way to produce so-called ESG products, what David just described is much more the reality, that really investors want to dig into the data itself and build their own models and understand how your business is capturing the sustainability opportunities, and also managing the risks. And so so good, thorough reporting, is incredibly important in all the ways that have just been described. Ratings, everyone, they get a lot of attention. But they're really they're only one part, and only, in my view, one limited part of the puzzle. So they perhaps, in my view, get undue attention, is what I would say.
Sure. Thank you very much. Anything that any of the speakers would like to add as sort of closing remarks at all?
I'll just come back on Simon.
Thanks,
and
Lucy.
Simon's point. I really agree with that, and on the waste management piece as well. A lot of this is about engaging with all of your stakeholders. Like, you can't hope to have accurate waste unless you've got people putting things in the right bins. It seems so pedantic, but it's actually crucial to making sure that you operate properly and being better. So listening to your employees, listening to your investors, working across the market, as we've spoken about before, engaging in those peer groups, just mean we can all raise our standards and be better. We're all just trying to work together. We'll get there quicker if we do.
Thanks, Lucy. Simon?
No, I'm just remembering how helpful I found the UN Global Compact as a mechanism for getting engagement and driving change within the organization that I was working in 10 years ago. We were very early, embarrassingly early in our sustainability journey for a consultancy that was preaching this to the outside world. And but UNGC was an incredibly useful mechanism for driving change and getting buy-in internally, very accessible, very easy to build consensus around. So really just gratitude for UNGC's work and the work of everybody on the call in driving this change within their organizations too. It's not easy, but it's incredibly important.
Thank you, Simon. And David?
Yeah, I think I'll just finish by saying, look, yeah, I know it seems a lot of work. There's a lot of stuff coming at you. It isn't just about reporting for compliance sake. It really is being used in increasingly sophisticated ways, as Simon touched on, by the investment and finance community. So it's worth putting the time and energy in. You know, do engage to understand what's worth putting in, and you know, what's valuable and what's less valuable. But you know, it's hard work, but it's worth it.
Thank you very much. And just to add, I think it's important to realise that report on what is relevant to your business, unless it is a mandatory requirement. Okay, we're nearly up on time. So I will hand back to Billy. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Before we finish up, I'd just like to highlight some of our upcoming events, which will be posted in the chat for you to register. So we're also hosting another webinar tomorrow. Maybe you've had enough of reporting at this point. So it's on net zero business transformation, enabling the change. So we'll be discussing how companies can advocate for and enable solutions to achieve net zero as soon as possible. And then another webinar on July 11th will explore addressing energy-related emissions, focusing on the topic of how organizations can increase renewables generation and storage capacity. And finally, we'd be delighted to see as many of you as possible at our annual summit. Join us on October 1st at the Guildhall in London. This is our biggest event of the year, and tickets are available now. And before I go, I'd just like to say thanks again, everyone, for your time today and for engaging with this series. It's a 5-part series. This is the last session, and I really appreciate all the questions we've had and the chance to host these conversations with experts. Thanks again, David, Caroline, Lucy, and Simon, for your time today. If you've been to one webinar or maybe all 5, or maybe you're watching a recording, we hope that this is a supportive and informative resource for your reporting journey. When you leave the call, there's a feedback form that will appear. So we'd really appreciate if you could take a minute or two just to fill this out and be honest about your experience. We understand it's time out of your day to attend these sessions, so your feedback's really helpful for us to develop future open access resources. Thanks again, and that's us for today. Bye.